The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I walked in from the garage. Not a bill, not a card. A standard white envelope with my name written on it in her handwriting. The same handwriting I'd watched sign our mortgage 31 years ago. I set down my keys, picked it up. The paper inside was folded twice, neat and deliberate, the way she folded everything. I filed the papers. The house goes to closing on the 14th. You have until then to find somewhere else to be. I think we both know this has been over for a long time. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Caesar. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back along her creases, slid it into my shirt pocket and sat down at the kitchen table. The house was quiet in the way houses get when something has just changed permanently. I could hear the refrigerator running. A car going by outside, my own breathing. My wife's name is Sandra. We met in 1991 at a work conference in Cincinnati, at one of those hotel breakfasts where nobody really wants to talk to anyone but nobody wants to eat alone either. She sat across from me, reached for the orange juice at the same moment I did, and laughed. I thought she had the best laugh I'd ever heard. We married 18 months later, built a life the way people our age were taught to build lives. Steadily, quietly, together. I worked in civil engineering for 34 years. She taught elementary school for 22, then retired early when my income was enough. We raised 2 kids in this house. We buried a dog in the backyard. We replaced the roof twice and the water heater 3 times and had exactly 1 serious argument about which direction the guest bathroom tile should run. I thought we were fine. I want to say I had no idea. That would be easier to write. But the truth is, there had been small things, a coldness at dinner that I told myself was tiredness, weekends where she was present in the house but absent from the room, a phone she angled away when I walked past. I noticed. I said nothing. I told myself it was a phase, the way you tell yourself things when you're 63 years old and you don't want to know the answer to the question you haven't yet asked. The papers were already filed. The house was already under contract. She had been planning this for months, moving pieces without making noise, and I had been sitting right here reading the newspaper every morning, pouring my coffee, feeding the dog we no longer had. I didn't call her. I want to be clear about that. I picked up the phone once, looked at her contact for about 20 seconds, and put it back down. There was nothing to say yet. I didn't know enough yet. What I did instead was call my daughter. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was at her desk and not in a meeting. I said, "Hey, sweetheart." And she said, "Dad, what's wrong?" Just like that. Before I'd said another word. Because she knows my voice the way children know things about their parents that they never learned. They just always knew. I told her. I kept it brief. I read her the letter. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said very quietly, "I'm coming over." "You don't need to, Dad. I'm coming over." She was there in 40 minutes. My son-in-law, Gregory, stayed home with the grandkids. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd read the letter. And she didn't say much, and I didn't say much. And that was exactly right. Before she left, she said, "You need to call Warren." Warren is my attorney, not a divorce attorney. He handled my estate planning, my business contracts, that sort of thing. But my daughter was correct, and I knew it, and the next morning at 8 o'clock, I called him. He picked up himself, the way he always does. "I need to understand something," I told him. "My wife filed for divorce. She says the house is going to closing on the 14th. How is that possible without my signature?" There was a pause that I didn't like. "When did you last look at the deed?" I had no ready answer for that. You don't look at your deed. You put it somewhere safe when you first get it, and you don't think about it again, because it's your house, and of course it's your house, and why would you look at it? "Get it out," he said. "Call me back." It took me 40 minutes to find it. It was in a fireproof box in the closet, under the warranty documents for appliances we'd replaced years ago. I pulled it out and scanned it and called Warren back. He asked me to read him the vesting language. I read it. His pause this time was longer. What I had, he explained, was a deed that had been re-recorded 14 months ago. I was listed as a tenant in common with the right of survivorship, but the vesting had been structured in a way that, under a specific set of conditions that Sandra's attorney had apparently spent some time engineering, gave her the authority to execute a sale without requiring my simultaneous signature at closing. It wasn't simple. It wasn't clean, but someone had been very careful, and it was apparently legal enough that a title company had agreed to insure it. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the box. The warranty for a dishwasher we'd replaced in 2019. A user manual for a television we no longer own. How long ago did this happen? I asked. 14 months ago, you said. Did you sign anything 14 months ago? A refinance? Any kind of property document? I thought about it. We had done a HELOC in 2023. Home equity line of credit. Sandra had said it was a good time to have access to funds. Interest rates being what they were, we should have liquidity available. I had signed at the kitchen table. There had been a lot of papers. There are always a lot of papers. The HELOC, I said. That would be my guess, Warren said. I want to stop here for a moment because I know some of you are asking the same thing I asked Warren that day. How? How can someone bury a deed restructuring inside a home equity closing? How does a title company allow that? How does a husband sign away part of his protection without knowing what he's signing? Warren's answer was not satisfying, but it was honest. It happens more than people know. The documents are long. The language is dense. People trust, and when someone has spent months working with an attorney to engineer an outcome, they have time and precision on their side that a person signing at a kitchen table does not. I'm not telling you this to make you afraid of your own documents. I'm telling you because I made a choice in that moment, sitting on the edge of the bed with my wife's name on a deed that no longer protected me the way I thought it did, to know everything before I did anything. That was the most important decision I made in all of this. I did not call Sandra. I did not call her attorney. I did not call anyone who might, through a word or a tone or a hesitation, indicate that I knew what I knew. Instead, I drove to Warren's office, and we spent 3 hours going through everything. The deed. The HELOC. The closing timeline. The divorce filing. He brought in a colleague who specialized in marital property, a woman named Phyllis who had the kind of calm that comes from having seen every variation of human betrayal over a 30-year career and not being surprised by any of them. The closing is in 18 days, Phyllis said, looking at the documents. I know. That's our window. The house was worth $890,000 on the current market. After the mortgage balance, there was roughly $610,000 in equity. That was the asset we were talking about. That was what was on the table. Phyllis filed an emergency motion to cloud the title that same afternoon. When you cloud a title, you create a legal encumbrance, a recorded claim against the property that makes it essentially impossible for the sale to close until the cloud is resolved in court. The title company Sandra had lined up would not insure a clouded title. The buyer could not close on a clouded title. The closing on the 14th was not going to happen. Sandra called me that evening for the first time since the letter. "What did you do?" she said. Her voice had something in it I hadn't heard in a long time. Not anger exactly. More like the sound a person makes when a plan they believed was finished turns out not to be finished. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said. "Don't do this, James." "Sandra, I genuinely don't know what you're referring to." I'd been having some conversations with my attorney about the property. "That's my right." She hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. The house was the same house it had always been. Same counters, same light over the table, same creak in the third stair. But I was looking at it differently now. Not as a home, as a document, as evidence. Let me tell you about a man I'll call my wife's friend. I didn't know him well. He had come into our social circle in the past 2 years, someone Sandra had met through a running group. She'd taken up running at 61. which I had fully supported, because I thought it was good for her. Which shows you how wrong you can be about what something means. His name is not important. What is important is that he was, I discovered through Phyllis's investigative work, the intended buyer of my house. He wasn't listed on the purchase agreement by name. He had used an LLC. Let that settle. My wife had found a buyer for our home. The buyer was her companion. The purchase price in the agreement was $774,000, $116,000 below the property's appraised value. The arrangement, if it had closed, would have transferred the equity of my home to an entity controlled by a man I had shaken hands with at neighborhood parties, at whom I had smiled, for whom I had probably grilled something at some point in the past 2 years. When Phyllis showed me the LLC registration and the connection to his name, I felt something shift inside me that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was more like watching the last piece of a puzzle fall into place and realizing the picture it made was one you had not wanted to see. I went home. I made dinner. I called my son in Denver. I told him calmly and completely, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Dad, what do you need me to do?" I told him to stay close to his phone. What I needed to do next required more than an attorney. I called a forensic financial consultant, someone Phyllis recommended, who specialized in marital asset cases. I'll call her Louise. She was methodical and plain-spoken, and she started pulling threads I didn't know were loose. The HELOC we'd opened 18 months ago had a $150,000 credit line. She asked me to pull the statements. I had not looked at those statements since we opened the account. I don't say that with pride. I say it because it's true and because I think there are people watching this who understand how that happens. You build a life with someone, you divide responsibilities, you trust, and somewhere in that trust you stop looking at certain things because you have always assumed they are fine. The balance drawn on that line, $112,000. I asked Louise where the money had gone. "Give me a few days," she said. What she found was that the money had moved through a sequence of transfers, out of the HELOC into a joint checking account, then out of the joint checking account in a series of transactions just under the reporting threshold, eventually landing across several months in an account I had never seen, in Sandra's name alone. This was relevant to the divorce in a significant way. In our state, marital waste, the dissipation of marital assets in anticipation of divorce, is a factor that courts consider when dividing property. Sandra hadn't just been trying to sell the house below value to a buyer who happened to be her companion. She had also been systematically moving shared money out of our marriage. The morning that Phyllis filed the motion to cloud the title, she had also filed a motion for interim financial restraints. This meant neither of us could move, transfer, hide, or encumber any marital asset during the proceedings without a court order. The accounts were frozen. The HELOC was frozen. Everything was stopped in place. Sandra's attorney called Warren 2 days after that. The call was, by Warren's description, somewhat tense. There was a lot of language about reasonableness and proportion, and the desire for an amicable resolution. Warren listened. He took notes. He said he would convey everything to me and respond appropriately. When he called me afterward, he said simply, "They're worried." The divorce proceedings took 7 months. I won't give you every hearing and every motion. That would be its own very long video, but here are the things that mattered. The title cloud prevented the sale. The buyer's LLC quietly withdrew the purchase offer 2 weeks into the litigation. I assume the man whose name was on that LLC found that buying a legally contested property from a woman in the middle of a divorce proceeding was not the investment opportunity he had anticipated. I hope he was inconvenienced. The forensic accounting of the HELOC funds gave our case significant leverage. Phyllis argued successfully that the $112,000 in transferred funds should be credited back to the marital estate. The judge agreed. That money was accounted for in the final settlement. The house was ordered to be sold at fair market value with a licensed real estate agent and a court-supervised process. It sold for $887,000. After the mortgage payoff and legal fees, the remaining equity was split according to the settlement. I received 58%. I want to be careful here about what I say and don't say. I don't celebrate what happened to Sandra. I was married to this woman for 31 years. I loved her in the way you love someone you've built a life with. Not always passionately, whatever she became or what she wanted or why she made the decisions she made. That's not entirely for me to judge. People get lost. People convince themselves that what they're doing is necessary, even justified. I don't know what story she told herself. What I know is that I did not do nothing. There were nights during those 7 months when I sat in a motel room. Because the house had been a point of contention, I had voluntarily relocated during proceedings, which Warren advised. And I thought about the man I had been for 31 years. The man who noticed things and said nothing, who saw the phone being angled away and told himself it was tiredness, who signed documents at the kitchen table because of course he trusted her. I don't regret trusting her. Trust is not a weakness. The problem wasn't that I trusted, it was that I stopped paying attention. Those are different things. My daughter called me the night the settlement was finalized. She said, "How are you feeling?" I thought about it for a moment. "Like I'm starting something," I said. "I don't know what yet." "That's okay," she said. "You have time. I'm 64 years old and I have time." That's something I didn't fully understand until I was sitting in a motel room with a court filing on my phone and nothing left to lose, and I realized that actually, in some important sense, everything left to happen is ahead of me. I'm not in the motel room anymore. I found an apartment about 12 minutes from my daughter. I see the grandkids twice a week. My son flew in from Denver for 2 weeks after the settlement, and we went fishing for the first time in maybe 15 years and didn't talk about any of it for the first 3 days. And that was exactly right. I think about the envelope on the counter sometimes, the way it was sitting there, so neat, so ordinary looking, waiting for me to come in from the garage. She thought that letter was the end of something. In a way, she was right. But endings, I've learned, don't always belong to the person who writes them. I still think about that phone call I almost made, the one to Sandra the night I found the letter. I had her name on the screen. I held it there for 20 seconds, and something in me said, "Not yet. You don't know enough yet." That pause saved me. Not dramatically, not in a movie way, just practically, quietly, in the way that the right decision at the right moment tends to save you from the wrong version of the next several years of your life. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story, and I keep coming back to the same thing. Sandra didn't fail because she was a bad person in some simple, clean sense. She failed because somewhere along the way, she convinced herself that what she wanted was more important than what was true. That's a different kind of failure, a slower one. The decision to work with an attorney to restructure a deed without telling your husband. The decision to move $112,000 out of a shared account in careful increments. Those aren't crimes of passion. Those are choices made over months by someone who had decided that the rules of fairness didn't apply to her situation, and every one of those choices set a consequence in motion that she couldn't see yet because she was too focused on what she was building to notice what she was becoming. I don't say that with anger anymore. I say it because it's the truest thing I know about how these situations unfold. The consequences weren't punishment. They were just the natural result of the structure she had built. When Phyllis filed that title cloud, when the forensic accounting traced every transfer, when the judge ordered the sale at fair market value, none of that was revenge. It was just reality catching up to a plan that had been constructed on a foundation of dishonesty. Reality always does that eventually. It just takes its time. What I had to bring to this was something I didn't know I had until I needed it. The first was the discipline to stop and think before I acted. To call Warren instead of calling Sandra. To spend 3 hours in an attorney's office instead of 3 hours on the phone saying things I couldn't take back. That kind of clear-headedness isn't something you're born with. It's something you practice or you don't. And I am grateful that somewhere in 63 years of living I had practiced it enough. The second was the willingness to face what was real, not what I wanted to be real. Not the marriage I thought I had. What was actually in those documents, those bank statements, that LLC registration. There's a version of me that doesn't open the fireproof box. That signs whatever Warren suggests and takes the first settlement offer and goes home. That version of me would have lost not just money, but something harder to name. The sense that I had stood up for what was mine, not out of greed, but out of self-respect. And the third was simply enduring. 7 months of proceedings, motel rooms, hearings, my son flying in from Denver, my daughter calling every other day. There were nights when I genuinely did not know how it would end. I just kept going. That's all endurance really is, continuing to show up for the process when you cannot yet see the outcome. Gregory asked me once during one of those 7 months whether I was okay. I told him I was. He nodded slowly, the way a good son-in-law nods when he suspects you're not entirely telling the truth but respects you enough not to push. He was right to suspect, but I was also right to say yes. Both things were true at the same time. I wasn't okay the way a person is okay when everything is fine. I was okay the way a person is okay when they have decided to keep going, and that turns out to be enough. The apartment is quiet in the mornings. I make coffee. I read, 12 minutes from my daughter's house. Some mornings I think about the envelope on the counter, sitting there so neat and so certain of itself, and I think she thought that letter was the last word. It wasn't.